Tuesday, and welcome to the MSLead Chronicles. It's a podcast on a mission in medical affairs and leadership. I'm Mary Morton, and along with my buddy, Chad Fellers, we're going to have casual talk about important topics and challenges in leadership. And we are so glad you're here. Stay tuned. That's not very nice. Why do you always start like that?
I never got a merit badge for being nice, Mary. You know that. Well, with that, welcome back to another episode of MSLead Chronicles. My name is Chad Fellers, one of your hosts, along with my nifty sidekick, Mary Morton. How are you today, Mary?
I'm terrific, like always. And I wore this shirt just to remind you today. Get from the camera. Once in a while, someone amazing comes along. Here I am. Just to remind you.
I think because that is a size that's too small, you couldn't give it to me, and so you ended up keeping for yourself. So next time, if you'll just get a little larger size, you could actually give me that gift instead of wearing it yourself, Mary. So
I probably have a different one getting made for you.
That's probably fair too. Again, listeners, it's great to be with you again. We've got a great conversation that we're going to have today. You're not going to want to miss this. We've been on a journey this year talking about all different types of things as it relates to leadership development, to being a great MSL, and how do you put all those pieces together? How do you lead well as an MSL in your day in, day out activities? And our guest today is going to give what I think are going to be some great practical tips that you can implement right away. With that, Mary, why don't you introduce our guest for us?
Absolutely. So joining us today from beautiful Florida, Cathy Andorfer, PhD in neuroscience with a specialty in neurodegeneration. Is that right?
That is correct.
And so if you notice some of the artwork behind her, if you're watching, that is not something she purchased. It is created by her own hands and brain. And I am lucky enough to have one of the Cathy Andorfer originals on my wall. It's not behind me right now. That's my diploma, but I do have one at my office that I am so happy to have. But Cathy?
Someone manufactured your diploma anyway. So, I mean, maybe she didn't do it, but somebody put it together. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mary.
Cathy, welcome to the show. I apologize in advance and in reverse for Chad for today. So I was lucky enough to meet Cathy through a recommendation of my fellow Austinite, Drew Scheifele, back when you had joined Dermira. And we worked a little bit there before the Lilly acquisition. And so, gosh, how long has that been? I don't know. But it's been great working with you. And, you know, I've talked to so many people who fangirl over you, or I guess fanboy over you, because there've been a number of men as well, about how giving and charitable you are with your advice and with your suggestions, and people that you have helped get into this career for no other reason than out of the goodness of your heart. And so we're going to let Cathy talk a little bit. I'm going to shut up in a second, but we are going to be talking today about her book, The Art of Excellence, Build a Rockstar Career as a Medical Science Liaison and Beyond. And yes, as you notice, I've always got flags in the books that I read because I always want to make sure I can find very quickly some of the things that I am excited about. But Cathy, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself that I haven't already?
Well, first of all, thank you for that very generous introduction. it's true, I have a deep passion for helping anyone who's interested in this role. I had a number of people who helped me along the way in my career, and I definitely believe in giving back and paying forward and all those things, right? I think it's such a fun career. And also, I think because I have this passion for human behavior and all that, I just like to help people. And I have some keen insight that I can share. And I've loved doing that. And that's partly what inspired me to write the book.
Wonderful. And so, on that note, I'm going to jump ahead and ask a question, but then we're going to get to Chad's favorite part, which is the takeaways that our listeners can be on the lookout for. But one of the things that you say early on in the book is about a former colleague of yours from the academic side who hounded you for like 3 years to become an MSL, and you kept saying no, 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 no. So how did he finally wear you down?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a little bit different than many other people's stories, right? I loved being an academic. I had a faculty position at the time, but had dreams of really continuing on in full professor status, and that was the world I saw for myself. But he and I went to graduate school together, and he kept telling me about his job, and I asked him all these questions, and I just didn't get it what he did. But he kept telling me that I had taken like the wrong color pill. I was in the matrix. I went the wrong way. Like I didn't get it at all. And finally, one day, I guess, like just in academic life, sometimes you have not the greatest days. And for whatever reason, one of the times he's like, send me your resume. There's an opening in Florida. You'd be great. You got to do it. And for whatever reason, that time I was like, all right, sure, I'll send you my resume. And then the rest is really history. He did a great job coaching me on how to prepare for the interview. And I aced it and got the offer and decided, actually, it was Drew Scheifele who was one of the people as part of my interview process. And that's a full circle right there.
And the fact that you actually transitioned a lot of this application that you received and you learned, you put it into a book. I think that's phenomenal. That takes a lot of work. I would love to hear really, and there's a few different resources that are out there. Tell us more about your book, if you will, what and how that really is differentiated with some of the other resources that are out there for MSLs. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's becoming more and more resources available since when I first had the idea to write the book. But the majority of resources are really on how to break into the role, how to get hired as an MSL. And I realized that there were very few, and there really aren't any books that I know of that really dive into how to excel at the role once you get it. And I really wrote this book for myself, like the old version of me when I started, because it is a really interesting role with a lot of nuances and things that most of us figure out on the job. And depending what company you land in, you're going to get more or less support. And I happen to be super lucky that the company that I joined was very good at training MSLs in not only the science, but also in how to be good with the soft skills. And I had great mentors and all that, and I pulled it all together. But I realized like I had been doing all those like side conversations with people, and people wanted to know how to get good. I was like, oh, I'll write this book for that version of myself and all these people who are asking me these questions. And I think what differentiates it is like not only have I the experience as an MSL, I've risen up in several layers of leadership. And so I know exactly what it takes to be successful on a team and to help others do the same. And so this is just sort of dumping my brain onto a book.
Fantastic. With that, Cathy, why don't you share with our listeners, if as tradition, what are our key takeaways? What are some nuggets that you want to leave with the audience? Make sure that they walk away with from today's conversation.
Sure. I'd say I think being smart and knowing your science is not enough.
Okay.
You will never excel as an MSL if you just rely on your ability to talk science. You need to understand people. You need to be able to navigate challenging conversations. There's so much more to the job.
Perfect. Let's dig in. Mary, you want to lead off with a few additional questions?
Yes, actually, I do. I don't know if I would call this a question or just an observation. Um, One of the things that there are certain words that will be said in the middle of these conversations that I see Chad's face light up on. You know, he likes to talk about insights. He likes to talk about Chat GPT, which I call Chad GPT because he loves it so much. Sometimes I call it his girlfriend. Yeah. And so he knows what I'm talking about. If I text him, I say, I asked your girlfriend this question today, and this is what she said. And he knows that's what I'm talking about. But so my observation, all joking aside, is that at the end of every chapter, you have a key takeaway. So, did you do that? So it is observation and a question. Did you do that because some people skip to the end and go, okay, so what is my key takeaway? And then I'll go back and read the whole chapter? Or do you think that people use it that way?
Sure, I think everybody reads books in a different way. I did that there first to summarize. Some people like to skip to the end, is it worth it, and work backwards. I also think it's nice, because this is meant to be a reference book, it reads like a story and a narrative, and it should hopefully flow like a conversation with me. But at the end, if you read the book and then you want to go back and like, oh yeah, she said something about this. What was that about? Oh, let me go to the key takeaways. Boom, boom, boom. Yeah, this is the chapter I want. So it's really to have that efficiency, as well as just some people like summaries and some people like, you could skip the key takeaways too, because everything that's in them, I don't introduce anything new there. It's in the chapter itself. So it's a holdover from just the way I like to read books too.
So I'm that person that doesn't like spoilers. And so I don't skip to the end. Like my son and I watch F1, Formula One racing, and I like for us to watch it together. And if he's late getting up, because a lot of times the races start at like 6 a.m. because it's afternoon wherever they're having the races. If he gets up and I haven't watched it yet, he'll come down and say, I already saw on Twitter who won. Like, I hate that. So, but what it did for me, because I didn't skip to see the takeaway at the end, is I would read the chapter and then I would see the key takeaways. And since I have ADHD, it helped me to go, okay, I got it all. I comprehended it. Or if it's late in the day and I'm like, oh, I didn't see that when I was reading, I'm going to have to go back. And so, but I love having the key takeaways at the end. It just shows how mentally organized you are. I mean, I thought it was beneficial for me just in that regard.
Well, I'm glad
everybody.
I found that valuable. And I think also because there is a mix of narrative in there, and I share examples and like what I learned in my journey. So some of those takeaways may be a little bit more involved, like inside that story, and this way, very clear.
I really I want to go to your first key takeaway when you talk about science is not enough to be good at this role. And I fully agree with you, by the way. I often say I value EQ more than IQ. I think I can teach somebody a process, but I can't teach people skills in ways. I mean, you can refine it to some degree, but having that awareness, I mean, now that Chat GPT is available, providers can go to resources to get information, right? But they don't have the context, they don't have support, all those different things. So developing relationship to be the scientific bridge is essential. Can you share some experiences, or like when did that really become relevant to you, or has that always been your style? Did you learn from experience that, hey, this is something I really have to focus in on? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it's always been, well, it's become my style through learning, right? But I also had good mentors along the way. And because of my degree and my academic background, I have no problem going deep into the science. And in fact, that was one of the key things that my friend, the grad school friend who got me into the role in the first place, coached me on. He's like, okay, I built my slide deck. He's like, you got to dumb it down. You got to dumb it down. And not by dumb it down, but like take it down another notch, another one. And then he said, when you think it's ready, cut that in half again, right? Because he's like, your job, you don't have to prove how smart you are. You have to prove all these other pieces. So he already gave me those clues early on. And I think that's one of the things we talk about. Like, you can't just go into a conversation and dump data, or you could, but it's not going to be effective, right? You need to engage, you need to connect. Why does that person want to pay attention to you? Why do they trust you to share your information? So there's so much work you have to do before you get to the science. And with some people, it's a little less because they're just generally analytically driven. They're like, yeah, just take me there. I don't care about all the soft stuff. But you have to be smart enough to figure out that that's who that person is. And then other people, you got to really work around a whole lot of just very web-like conversation, right? Like, what is your family? How is this? And then finally they'll be like, oh, what do you got for me? Right? Sometimes it's completely different types of people. So knowing that is very important to being successful in this job.
I love that, when you talk about, this book is not to help somebody become an MSL, it's to help them get it all figured out and be the best that they can be. I love that you focus so much of what you talk about in the book about having the realistic expectations, understanding that, the maybe it's not the strong will survive, but the adaptable will survive. And knowing that, what do they say? The one constant is change. Because if you expect that what's happening in your job life today is going to be the same as it is 9 months from now, it could send you into a spiral. I mean, and so you first became an MSL. How long ago was that?
About 12 years ago.
12 years ago.
Yeah, actually, December 12th, I think, will be my 12th year anniversary. I
12,
accepted, but
12, 12.
yeah. Oh my
Wow.
God. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So what do you think, and I'm sure you kind of thought about this a little bit as you were writing the book, reflecting on your own experience in your first few years as an MSL, but trying to adapt some of those things that would be more relevant here now, 10 years later. What do you think has changed from when you first became an MSL? And then what do you think has not changed at all? Or maybe we've just gotten better at understanding it.
I think there's a lot there. So, what's changed is that the role is more known, right? Even 12 years ago, I didn't know what the role was until my friend kept like insisting that I would be good at it, right? And even once I became one, then just telling people what you did or why I was leaving a really cool academic position to go do this thing in industry, right? It wasn't known within this space. Never mind than thought leaders knowing what you do. Like, you show up in the office, like, who are you? Oh, you're in sales? What? I don't understand. And that's become a lot more known in the world. So that's a definite change. And then certainly just more companies embracing the need for MSLs, more companies being willing to invest in MSLs, resources and teams and all of that, knowing how important they are to the success of a company, pre-launch, launch, and beyond. And even in the preclinical or pre-commercialization phase, how important MSLs can be for the success of trials and enrollment. All of that has just become much more known. So that's a big evolution, I think. And then, of course, the recent changes are kind of a backswing to companies maybe cutting down on the field force just because of resources, and also a switch to Chad's girlfriend taking over a little bit,
Yeah,
right?
active listening there. Good job, Cathy. Go ahead.
Yeah, so AI is definitely has the potential to be making a big impact in the future. So I'd say those are the things that are like growing and evolving. But then the piece that isn't changing is the one that I've started with as my key takeaway, right? It is not just about the data. It's not just about the science. It's how do you leverage soft skills to help contextualize, help meet someone where they are, understand what their pain points are. They may say something, but they mean something completely different. And if you're smart enough to really listen actively, ask good questions, you can take what they say first to a completely different place where you're actually able to solve their problems. And so to me, that is universally the greatest thing that MSLs do. It is a thing that will never be replaced as far as I don't think anyway.
understanding their with them. I think it was Vanderbilt at one of my when I was in MSL, and it was at a quarterly grand rounds they offered the community. And it was my first time to engage, and the fellowship director was sitting right beside me. I would never answer my emails, and then she was actually working in the midst of someone presenting. I took a peek over. She had like 350 emails that she had not even opened. Right, and so it's this idea of we get we take offense if we don't hear back from people or we're not being prioritized. But the reality is it's 0.01% of the things that they're doing. It may be 50% of what we're trying to accomplish, right? Too. So it's just this different view. And so just trying to understand that. And then again, being able to adapt, understanding certain styles or even what drives people will help increase that percentage. Sometimes it's very difficult for scientists to buy in about why this emotional component is so essential to being successful. Can you talk about ways that you have assured confidence in that, or being able to provide evidence to them, and some practical approaches to make sure that that there's buy-in across the group to move forward with that type of strategy?
Yeah, so there's a lot there. I think it's partly sharing examples, right? How has this worked? What is an example? How can you solve it? Solution oriented. What's the problem? What works? How does it go forward? And I think because there's great science and data behind behavioral engagement, right? So it's, again, knowing your audience, who's on your team. You're going to have a mix of everybody, so you have to give a little bit to each person on your team or each style on your team. So for the analytics, you present the data like, here's what we know from human behavior studies that makes an impact. Like, take that and run with that. Or the people who have more of an amiable style, well, they already know that they're usually better at some of that EQ already anyway. But it's that whole gamut. And then I think most of the things, like I do in the book, is sharing practical examples and tips. It's not, okay, here's my example, but how do you turn that example into something that you, in a different setting, can then pull forward? So it's hitting every point, right? If you, in everything as a leader, if you lead by example, and if you can have the opportunity to be with your team in the field, they can see what you do, then they can learn from that. Or you observe them doing something, and then next time you can give them a little bit feedback. Hey, you could try this, try that. So it's always about the concepts, and it's about the application and the pull through.
So we talk about how technology is new. Here it's a lot of the new technology that has come about that is, intended to make the job, I don't want to say easier, but I can't think of another word but easier. But what do you think are some of the bigger challenges that MSLs are facing now that's unrelated to technology, that you address in the book, that people could be prepared for if they're now in their first role?
So challenges outside of technology that are in the MSL world, I would say those would be what have always been the challenges, right? Like, you come into a territory, you may or may not, it may not be a territory that's already been developed. If it's not developed, you have to figure out how to do that. There's a lot of back work you need to do in order to understand what your role is, what your territory is, and then how you personally can most maximize that in terms of who you're going to see, when you're going to see them, how you're going to do that. How do you fit that to your personal life? Like, when do you need to be home? When do you need to be in a certain place? And then there's all the internal draws. Like, sometimes it's a challenge to the communication from leadership is like, you need to be in the field all the time. And then someone's telling you, but I need you to work on this slide deck, and I need you to do this, and you need to be on this conference call on this one, this one, this one. And then you have to logistically travel, like, from one place to another. You don't have a personal secretary. You don't have someone usually setting up your appointments. You have to figure out a lot of different pieces all together. And so I think that's always been the biggest challenge is that owning your territory, owning your schedule, and still doing what you need to do to fulfill the company needs, your whatever comes from leadership, and finding that balance. And then also getting into your conversations once you can be in front of a thought leader, prepared for that in a way that is over prepared so it feels so natural and seamless. But behind the scenes, there's so much energy and effort that goes into being ready for that. So I think there's just the ability, or the challenge is, how do you pull it all together and make it look easy and feel easy and not
That's
burn out?
really that's a really interesting way to put it. I'm actually kind of getting a little anxious thinking about that. So if we're thinking about somebody who is in their first MSL role and they were previously a clinical pharmacist, or previously an academician like you, were there things that you had responsibility for that were under your purview that you had to manage all of these balls that you're juggling, that you're like, okay, I can manage, I can be my own admin here on all this stuff and keep all my stuff straight? Or was it like, oh my gosh, the first time you
Well, I
had to
think there's
manage all of these things in the background?
I think there's definitely the transferable skills that we all bring in. Yes, I was managing a lot of different pieces at the time I left. I had a like $3.6 million grant that I was working on multiple institutions. So yeah, there's things that everyone who comes into this role often has, but it's fine tuning it or fitting it for the purpose, right? It was mind blowing, like what I had to do, and how to figure out, well, what do I actually prioritize, right? I think that's the one piece that, unless you have a really good manager who understands that you need this information, sometimes you start in the role, you're like, okay, well, everything's a priority. What do I do first, right? I've always found some of the goal setting for the year, especially in my early days. It's like, well, how do we have a 2-page goal document, right? What is my priority? Right? And my definition of a priority is one thing, and like maybe three. Like we can handle 3 things at a time. And I try to do that with my teams. It's like, here's the 3 things that are most important. Here's the one I want you to focus on now. And then maybe every week that priority could shift, but ideally less is more. But unless you have someone who starts you off thinking like that and you come into the role, you're like, I really don't know. So that's the big challenge, is how do you sift through a lot of competing interests? Also, one person may tell you this is a priority, but someone else may tell you this and this and that. And then learning, like, whose voice is the one that I need to listen to, or do I have to just figure this out for myself? So I think there's a lot there.
There's a lot of leadership qualities that you just spoke to, right? When you think about, I can hear that that comes naturally from you, not being just a manager, but really kind of leading to think through those types of things and be able to articulate that. That was really well said. Your book touches on moving into leadership roles. That's one of the things, that's one of the reasons why Mary and I started this podcast. We're thinking about people transitioning. Oftentimes in medical affairs, you have a outstanding performer, individual contributor that is just killing it in their territory, great relationships, always has the highest metrics, brings a lot of value, projects, this, that, and the other. And there's this thought that, hey, I can just elevate this person into a leadership role, leading a team, and I'm going to get that same type of impact that's going to be magnified. So what we've realized is, obviously that's not the case. It's a different skill set that's required when it comes to leading. So when your book touches on moving into those, what could you share with MSLs specifically to keep in mind as they're thinking or considering a move into more of a leadership type position?
Yeah, so there's a lot there too. I think many MSLs think because it's the next step in promotion that that's what they want to do, without really understanding what's involved in being a leader of a team, especially a first line manager. First line managers have a lot coming at them because they have leadership coming from above with what needs to be done with the team, and then their team, who may have recently been their peers, have suddenly problems that they didn't know existed when they were a peer. I think that was the thing that blew my mind the first time I became a manager. I did become a manager of my peers. I was just out there crushing my job, and I thought they were all doing it too. And they mostly were, but I didn't realize how nuanced every person is and what they need from a manager. I was very hands off. I'm like, just tell me what you want, I'll get it done. And that was definitely worked for me, but that does not work for everyone. And learning how to, just like you adjust your style with each of the thought leaders, you have to adjust your style to each member of your team. And you have to be able to navigate your collective organism of what your team is, right? Like, because each personality becomes a thing, and then how do you help navigate that? So there's a lot to it. And then of course it's how do you get your team to be motivated and accomplish things? How do you set that tone and message for like what needs to be done prioritization wise, and keep them happy, and also keep your leadership happy? And there's so much involved in that that I don't think people who are like, oh, I just want to be a manager because that's the next step. They don't get it. And then once they get into that role, it can be very eye-opening.
Collective organism. I've never heard that before. I had to write that one down.
It is. There's a lot of things that we just, I got to be honest with you. I wasn't prepared my first leadership roles to really succeed. And it's always a constant learning journey. But even thinking back, my history in retail, getting into management really quick, and I was definitely what I would call a manager there. I mean, I just making schedules, this, that, and the other, but not really helping people think or developing other leaders. I think that's a distinguisher in ways. Learning that just your language, just like my love language is different from my wife's. I mean, if I try to speak to her and what is important to me, it doesn't resonate with her well, right? And I think that it's the same application is required, like you just mentioned, understanding, taking the time to understand the individuals on the team, what drives them, how they receive information, whether it's via text, via email, via phone call, which one's their preference, can you accommodate as much as you can and still be efficient with your time? There's just a lot of things that are there. And that's something that I don't think is really considered when we step into this type of role. And I'm not sure there's a lot of training that really helps point to those things for success factors. I think we have to learn it the hard way at times. And so I think that this is great application. And I love that your book speaks to this, and even what you've shared on the podcast speaks to it as well too. It's also, I mean, would you say it's just a shift in mindsets from who your customer or who your KOL is as a leader?
Yes, and I think there's a lot more to it as well, right? You ideally understand the business when you're an individual contributor, but when you step into a management role, and then if you become a leader of leaders, you really need to understand what is the strategy, what is the bigger reason for doing things, and then figure out how to translate that to your team so that they get it, and also that you can protect them from what's noise, right? There's a lot of stuff that happens, especially in a big company at the higher level. There's discussions that if your team knew about them, they would lose focus completely. And half the time they never come to fruition, so it's better that they don't even know about it. And at the same time, you still have to ideally maintain credibility and authenticity with your team so that they know that you have their back, you're there for them, and also that you keep them, like, just keep the noise away, right? Who cares about the noise? There's what you need to know for your day job. But that all takes a lot of coordination, and it takes a lot to pull together.
It's really interesting what you said, that you got to protect them from the noise, because about half the time it doesn't come to pass anyway. And it's just like creating this manic situation for people. You're so right about that.
Yeah. I think the other thing too, I've talked with other people about this, is that sometimes the executives have an idea and they're like, oh, we'll just get the team to go do that. But they don't realize by the time it gets down to the level of the individual contributor, time passes. You have to figure out how to make the message come, because not everybody is perfectly agile and like, oh yeah, you told me to do this yesterday, I'm going to do this tomorrow. Also, some things take time to implement. So you get something implemented and then executives like, oh, let's go do this now. And they think it's a lot easier, but don't realize the time it takes to get down to the level of application. And then sometimes they expect something to change based on what they just did, but they didn't give it enough time to go forward. So yeah, I think there's a lot of noise that can happen. At the same time, I don't mean to sound like I'm bashing executive leaders. Like, they make important decisions. And I think that's what you need to know when you want to step into a leadership role, is understanding what is key for strategy and how to get your team to get it.
So regardless of whether somebody is brand new as an MSL or they're mid-level in their career as an MSL, like not in a leadership role, I think a lot of people tend to try to generalize, well, in a small company, this, and a big company, this, and a medium-sized company, that. When I think those are kind of hyper generalizations. I mean, sometimes it's pretty spot on, sometimes it's not. But, really you should, once you get in the door, there are a few things, little clues and cues you can assess to say, this is how I'm going to make the most of my role here. I mean, what are things they can look at rather than just defaulting to it's a big company or it's a medium company or it's rare disease or whatever?
Yeah, so I would say, like, all of that, it's an open mind, right? Every single thing. If you read my book, there's one big theme that runs through it. It's keep an open mind. Keep an open mind about where you are right now and where you want to get to, and always check your assumptions and check and reflect. Like, check in with yourself. The more you do that, the more successful you'll be in anything you do. So that said, yeah, there's the assumption in big pharma, oh, it's so huge, it's cold, I'll never get to know anyone. That's not true. Like, if you take the time and energy, you can slowly work your way through knowing everybody in that company, depending. Like, I mean, you might need a couple of years to get there, right? But it's also be intentional and think about, well, okay, it's a big company. I can't get to everyone and understand everything yet. Let me work with my manager, work with other people who've been here forever, ask them, who should I know? Who should I talk to first? And kind of just build this network within the company. And it can start to feel very small. I had that in my most recent company that was massive. And I really felt very connected and in tune because I was strategic on how I networked and who I talked to. So I didn't know everybody in the company, but I started to know all the people that had anything to do with what I did. So there's that. And then I think there's also the idea, oh, sometimes big companies don't really, they're harder to make decisions and changes and innovation. And that can be true up to a point, just because there's so many layers and more decision makers. Like, you have to embrace the reality of where you are. That said, like, you can continue to try to innovate and, again, find the key decision makers and just keep, like, chipping away at that innovation piece. And that's something that I'm very passionate about. I need to bring that wherever I go. And it's just staying true to yourself, and then kind of using that. And then if you're in a small company, you may think like, oh, a smaller company, innovation and everything. But sometimes it's a little puddle, and everybody has one group think, and that can be
Yeah.
hard to make a change too, right? So it's always just check your assumptions. There are things to consider that you can bucket between those, but that's usually before you join something. And once you've joined, I think you can find your way if you're smart and strategic and intentional.
Well, I think that's really important. I'm sorry, I'm trying to write and not right off the page here. So I like the small puddle of groupthink. You're like hitting me with all these really cool phrases today. So I think one of the themes I've taken from this, and you probably, and I know that you elaborate more on these things, is that your opportunity is what you make of it. And you can't just sit in your chair and wait for somebody to tap you on the shoulder. You have to be proactive, and you have to really, you know, jump in and join in and participate. And so I loved that, and I love all these
Yeah,
other things too.
it's like control what you can control. I think is in essence what you're saying. I mean, there's so many things that are outside of our control that we have no. Don't let us add assumptions to it. That I mean, you're limiting yourself, number one, and then you're creating additional anxiety or frustration that may not even be warranted. So why do you spend that? There's only so much energy we can spend in a day, right? I mean, between personal and professional. So control what you control. Be careful with your assumptions. I think that was so good. People always ask me, like, what's the number one quality in an MSL that you find? And my answer is curiosity. And once we quit being curious, we start becoming stagnant, and things rarely change, right? And then innovation doesn't happen. So I love those ideas about not making the assumptions. I was a part of a small company that I thought I was going to get to make a ton of impact on. And it was basically like the Blues Brothers. They were getting the band back together, right? And just trying to do a rerun of what they did 15 years ago that was successful. And they didn't want to do anything different because that was the model, right? So you can't make these assumptions. You have to ask questions and be strategic about the things and the people that you're wanting to engage. And it can be mutually beneficial too, right? It's not just about the things that we get, it's what we could be able to give as well. So that's really good. That's really good feedback. Thank you for sharing that with us.
And I
Yeah.
love the control, which you could control, because there's like that whole section in her book, right? Where she starts talking about control, you can control. And whenever I hear somebody say that, or, I read that in your book, just that line, it's like, gosh, why don't I think about that every time I'm having a moment? Like, why get you can only control what you can control, and you can't let everything else throw you into a downward spiral if it's out of your control to manage. And I love so much of the book is about mindset and attitude and all of the soft skills that you were talking about in the very beginning. So I mean, you guys have got to, if you um, have not gotten this book yet, and I have 5 additional, I'm looking on my bookshelf, copies of this book that I'm giving away to people. I've already given away 5, so I have 5 left. I had 3 people in particular I was going to give copies of this book to, by the way, Cathy, but they got one from the author directly. So
Yeah.
just saying, but they probably got like an autographed copy, and I did, I could sign it, but it wouldn't mean anything.
I will
But
send you an autographed copy.
well, I got myself the hardback copy, but the others are paperbacks for the ones I was giving away. So I know I need to get you to sign mine. But this book I know, so for everybody, you can get it on Amazon. But and is the this book is so awesome. I've taken so much away from it. I would love to hear, because as I mentioned at the beginning, you've helped a lot of people, and I would love to hear a success story. You can leave the names out if you want to, but I would love to hear a success story that you're really proud of where you've kind of supported somebody in the early stages of their career. Do you have an example?
I have so many examples, it's hard to pull out one because, like we started with, right? I'm super passionate about this, and I have had a lot of people that I've helped along the way. But it has been fun. I sort of use especially people who are aspiring into the role. I am very busy, and like you were talking about the person with the 300 emails, we all have that, right? But somehow there's people who are just able to say the right things on LinkedIn or however they communicate with me, and then whoop, I'm sucked in, and now I'm like an hour and a half on the phone with them. Like I don't have an hour and a half, right? But they were able to get me to engage, and they pulled out all these things, and so I do love doing that. But also I have to protect my time better, but I can't help it. But I certainly earlier on had a few people that were able to get me to like just tap into to them and help them. And I guess I don't know how to tell the stories without giving away who the people are. So just say that I have had a few that I have helped first get into the role, and then once in the role, helped continue to coach and guide them along the way. I have many, many beautiful stories, and one in particular who reached out to me after he got the role, and then was in the role for almost 2 years, and then talked about like all the things I talked about in terms of how it might take a long time to get there and to feel good, and each of the milestones that I mentioned to him, he's like, yep, 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 you were totally right on them.
I can tie it back to what we just talked about, controlling what we can control. And I try to, I'm passionate about servant leadership. And that's one of the things, really kind of shifting that mindset with my team a couple of companies ago, as how do I really get people bought into this type of thing? And I mean, I think the beautiful thing is you get to control what you give to people too, and how you feel as a result of doing that. Like obviously for you, being able to invest in others even if there's no, I mean, the return is seeing them succeed, right? I think that that is giving the tools, and that you were getting to be a part of that journey. I think that that's a reward that can't ever be taken away from you. So how do we figure out and create segments and pockets of time where we can magnify that in all the work that we do, whether it's with the people internal, whether it's on our team, whether it's cross-functional partners, whether it's in our network, whether it's people that reach out to us on LinkedIn. I have the same thing happen quite often as well too. It's fun. It's fun to be able to do that, and the more people can buy in and actually see that and experience it, I think that that causes an explosion. So I love the fact that you were so invested in doing that. I'm curious, what is the next venture for Cathy? You've written a book, which I'm sure was a very tedious process. Congratulations on that. What's the next big thing for Cathy? Anything in mind that you want to share? Painting?
Sure.
I mean, you've done everything, right? So tell
Well,
us.
yeah, I mean, I would always love to double down a little bit more on my painting because I did really put that on pause while writing the book because I also do talk in the book about how you have to be intentional with your efforts, right? You can do a lot of things and go almost nowhere with them, or you can really focus on one or two and make exponential growth. And that's how I got the book done. But yeah, now that I don't have the book on my mind as much, I'm a little bit freewheeling. But I think the next step, I'm actually going to write another book, and I'm using this time between now and December to kind of percolate on what that topic is and where I want to go. And then hopefully I'll dive back into doing more writing, and I think I'll be much more efficient and effective this time around now that I get the process, and I also know where all the imposter resistance hurdles are, or how to get past them faster. So that's definitely part of the adventure. And then, yeah, I'm just growing my career and my leadership skills, and I'm just joined a new startup company. So built a team there, partly with Mary's help, and just really excited to lead them and grow and see where that takes us. And then, yeah, just see what the next adventure is.
You got
You're
bitten
gonna
by the author bug. Like,
Oh,
what's
yeah, why
next? Yes. Now what can I do? Well, I can't
you're
wait
gonna
to
have to
hear about
keep,
it.
yeah, I was about to say, you're gonna have to keep us posted on what this is. I'm curious. This is gonna be really good. Any other questions, Mary, or any comments, additional things before we wrap up, Cathy?
Well, I have one thing I want to add since she didn't want to give up anybody's name, and I'm not going to give up anybody's name either. But just for the listeners, if you want to know how absolutely genuine and authentic this woman is, um, there is a guy who because I didn't ask him first, I'm not going to use his name, who I was recruiting on a position that reported to Cathy. And he didn't even know what the job was yet. And he's like, oh, yeah, no, I want to work for Cathy. I'm like, well, let me tell you about the job. And previously, he's like, I'm on the leadership track. I had to take on this strategy piece and this other stuff. And then he didn't even know what the job was to report to Cathy. He's like, I'm in. But he wanted to work for her in any capacity he could. And he was willing to put certain things on hold for himself. And that's how meaningful she is to him. Oh yes, absolutely. So if he listens, he'll know I'm talking about him. But I don't know that you'll meet a person who cares and is as genuine and authentic about that. That's why everybody loves Cathy Andorfer. Period.
Well, I love everyone. I've been
Myself included.
so lucky to have incredible people on my team, and it's an honor to lead them all. And I know I've grown a lot as a leader, so some of the earlier ones, I wish they could have the newer version of me, but that's part of the process, right? We all learn and grow.
They helped you become the manager and leader that you are now. So they
Yes,
can
for
take
which
that with
I'm
them.
deeply grateful.
You can add me to the Love Cathy bandwagon. This has been great. This has been great. Thank you so much, Cathy, for hopping on and having a conversation with us today. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And so, yeah, next time you'll get a double hug.
Double hug.
Listen, I will write it. I will write it down, and maybe I can get a signed copy of your next venture. I'm already curious about what's going to be coming with Cathy as far as her next book. So I will be following. I'm gonna reach out to you on LinkedIn, I think, actually, and do this, and would love to stay connected with you. So Cathy, thanks so much for hopping on. We definitely will want to have you back at some point. Those that are in leadership roles, those that are trying to aspire to be that, those that are aspiring to be MSLs. We have the saying here that leaders don't develop in isolation. Leaders learn from leaders, and it's people like you that we want to be able to lean into and learn from. So thanks again for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Right, that's a wrap. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of MSLead Chronicles. Can't wait till next time. Until then, lead and learn well.